vertical hold, 1967. A rising storm pushed smoke from a burn pile down the road, across the yard, and up through the last hard-headed acorns of a red oak. The boy shuffled his feet where he thought the foul line should be, and stared at a hoop nailed to a chipped square of plywood hung from a telephone pole, leaning and disused. He tried to ignore cars whipping down Route 8, the sting of leaf smoke, taunts from his sister who spun in a tire swing slung over an oak branch, hesitant drops as anvil clouds grew angrier. He narrowed his sight on the front of the rim, on a spot where rusted metal glared through a gash in orange paint. When he hurled up the ball, the boy didn't follow its arc through gray air, but, bouncing from foot to foot, keeping his eyes on the rickety hoop, watched his shot pinball on the rim, and waited to know on what ground his prayer would fall. So I've always had very interesting haircuts. And this is, ironically a haircut poem. I grew up in what I consider the golden age of the house party movies. I don't know if those will be familiar to many of you. The title tells you everything about the content of the movie and about its level of seriousness. But it featured a hip-hop duo called Kid and Play, and my haircut was modeled after Kid, so it was sort of a tall box on top of my and my father would cut this haircut one Friday a month before school dances. Affection. One Friday a month, my father pulled clippers, walls, from a worn shoebox to tighten my fade before the school dance. The cut was accomplished with an economy of words and movement. I'd sit quietly under his hand, listening to the electric hum of the walls while his precise strokes sent flurries of curls to the bathroom floor, and his light touch on my chin rotated the angle of my head left or right, up or down. When he bent the tops of my ears flat to shave behind them, I'd start scraping fingernails against my thighs, the full power of gravity keeping me in the red folding chair until a gruff, "How's it look?" and I'd shoot up to preen from the mirror and inspect. Once satisfied, I'd stamp up to my room to dress for the night, while downstairs, my father swept 4 weeks' worth of hair from the floor tiles, the whisk of the corn broom over linoleum sounding softly as the cradle song that a child heavy with sleep only half hears. So every 7 days I sit in middle school meeting and I stare out at these Bible quotes. And especially in your young men shall see visions. I've tried and tried again to write a poem about that line. And I finally had this experience of being in a park and I was watching these boys at play. And they said something that you'll see in the poem. And I was like, this is finally the moment where I can use this line, which is my way of saying that I find not only what's written on the walls of the school, but life within our school community very inspiring, and I'm very thankful for that. And your young men shall see visions. Growing up, the girls, black and white, only played with rosy-skinned dolls, blondes at that, never brunettes. Walking to McGolrick Park, I see a black doll, a clump of her braids caught in the razor wire of a shuttered tile store. Kitchen and bath, its grimy galvanized security door locked this Sunday morning. On a park bench, Naomi and I sit with her brother and eat an apple pie we've carried from the other side of the BQE, under 18-wheelers barraging down the viaduct. Crust and glazed filling are surprisingly warm, given our trek, like the day, late November, is warm, surprisingly. 6 boys play tackle with a football that's too fat for their hands, and the team with the biggest boy, cornrows out, hair hanging to his shoulders, seems to score a touchdown every time. A pigeon flock wheels overhead and talking not to each other, but to their Pomeranian, either a scold or a coo, A scruffy young couple brunches on a ragged quilt under nearly unclad plane trees, while old Poles straggle home from church. 10 feet behind them, a trail of daughters, dressed in black and smoking, husbandless and cloudy as the day should be. The boys have shifted to a leaf pile across the park. Yawps and shrieks of their wrestling rise through scattered seed clusters, still swaying on mottled limbs, and meet the pigeons as they dip and veer. When the big boy yells, "Let's bury us and come up in 10 minutes," they agree, the smaller boys, flopping into the mound, rustling down toward the softening ground. The mud there, my own autumns tell me, bearing the shape, the lobes and teeth, the veins of broad and fallen leaves.
What is my favorite kind of poem? I like poems that tell a story, narrative poems. Again, poems that just use a couple quick details to kind of evoke an entire world or an entire experience. And I sort of like, at the end of those poems, I like to feel like on the verge of tears, basically, either because of the beauty of the poem or because of the emotional experience of the poem. I think poems should make you feel punched in the gut in some way, either at, again, the beauty of something or just the overwhelming sadness of it. People have been writing poetry for a long time, and there's no need to sort of reinvent the wheel. So I'm always reading what other poets are doing, both, from Sir Thomas Wyatt to contemporary poets, to sort of understand like different moves they make, and then sort of translating those moves, those sort of structural moves, to my own writing. So I think an important part, especially for a young writer, the best thing you can do is just read voluminously, read as much as you can, see what everyone is doing, and don't say, I'm only going to read books I like. Read books you don't like in case they can tell you something structurally. But I think, again, there's that moment of inspiration that I love, that where you have this one idea and you're sort of working through it, and you stay up all night, and it becomes unhealthy at a point. But I think we're ultimately, it seems to me, and in reading what other writers have said about their process, it seems to me where what separates good and great writing is that sort of revision stage, is taking that sort of raw material that you've generated and actually making it into art and forming it into art.
Who do you look for to give you second opinions about your writing?
I mean, my wife Naomi is one of my most important readers. I mean, she has a good sort of detector of like, this is headed in the right direction, this is, this is good, this is bad, on a very base level. But, for some of the more nuanced work, I have a couple people, one person from graduate school and one person from, who I've met, through the poetry community in Philadelphia, who are very good readers of my poems and give me great feedback. Yeah, it's very important to have a good reader. And I mean, that's the most important, I think, part of my education has been finding people whom I trust to read my work and give me honest feedback. I mean, I think we're taught to be very polite, and, I have yet to hear anyone say anything negative about the book, and I don't think that's because there aren't flaws there, but I think it's because people are polite. But I think there are times, and I think as my students will attest, where it's just best to be as honest as possible and say, this is what's wrong with this piece of writing, because otherwise you never learn and you never grow from that. So finding those people who are willing to be impolite is important.
In Oya in Old City, which is a poem that you didn't read, you say that a homeless woman chuntered away, and I looked up that word and it didn't exist. So I was wondering what inspired you to make up that verse?
I did not make it up. It's a
Sorry.
it's a Britishism. You might want to The Oxford English Dictionary might be a bit. Now, there's something about the challenge of just picking out those few details that create a sketch of an experience, but that sketch sort of renders the experience whole in a way. Just finding those few words that will evoke an entire experience or emotion or mood. Like, I enjoy that challenge in the way that I think some people enjoy, like sort of puzzling through the crossword or through a Sudoku or something like that. Yeah, I think trees are just, to me, are very convenient symbols of, and they can be multifaceted symbols. You know, they can be life, they can be death, they can be sadness, they can be beauty. There's just, you know, depending on the context in which the tree exists. But you can never sort of just say tree, right? So again, Daniel, to answer your question, I think something I've learned is it's never enough to just have a tree or a flower in the poem. It has to be that specific tree, right? Like there are tulip trees outside my window, there are holly trees outside my window here at school. It helps to give texture to the poem to be as specific as possible. I'll never understand why the process through which adults have their creativity ground out of them. So it's great on a daily basis to come to work with students who are so resilient, who you can say, this isn't working. You can give them behavioral notices when they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, but they dust themselves off and pick themselves up and keep working and keep living. And you ask them to be creative, and someone always surprises me on every assignment I give. Someone goes above and beyond and approaches an assignment from an angle which I never would have expected. And that sort of, it makes me want to keep teaching. It makes me want to keep assigning work so that so I can learn more about the world. But it also is sort of a model for me. Like being a writer, there's a lot of rejection in it. I probably sent this book manuscript out 15 times before it was accepted. I sent out hundreds of poems to literary magazines, and 90% of them were rejected. But seeing kids sort of get a bad grade, lose a soccer game badly, and dust themselves off, and just be back in school and happy-go-lucky the next day is important for me to see.